Welcome to the Final Girls Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring the history of horror film and TV. I'm Anna Bogutska, your podcast host. We're still in between seasons, but to tide you over and bring you some bonus episodes, including some amazing interviews that I've been given a chance to do. Now, on the podcast, I'm a big fan of Osgood Perkins and his very hyped up horror film, Longlegs. We've covered the film on the show. You can scroll in the feed and find that episode. I've also had a chance to interview Osgood himself on the show as well. But I couldn't pass up the chance to talk to Alicia Witt, one of the actresses involved in the making of the film and a fan favorite for horror nerds everywhere after her roles in Urban Legend and her multiple collaborations with iconic director David Lynch. I personally am a big fan of her work in John Waters' Cecil B. Demented, which is a film that gave me my Twitter and Instagram handles, which is Anna B. Demented if you don't follow me already. It was incredible to talk to Alicia, and we spoke mostly about her work on Longlegs, which she still has not seen, and you can find out why in this interview, as well as her work with John Waters and David Lynch. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, but please be warned, if you have not seen Longlegs, we talk about details of the film that will spoil it for you. So consider this your spoiler warning and your invitation to go and see Longlegs. And with all of that said, please enjoy my conversation with Alicia Witt. Just to kick off, Alicia, I need to ask you, this is something I ask everyone who comes by the show. What is your own personal relationship with horror?
Well, having done Urban Legend 26 years ago now, that was my first foray into the world of horror. And I went into it not really knowing what to expect. And I was much younger then, of course, so I had a sense that you had to sort of stay in the scary and dark world of it while you were playing a character that was experiencing those things. And so I think I came out of Urban Legend thinking, wow, that was heavy. And I went on to do a romantic comedy right afterwards and had a totally different experience. And then over the years, I've gone in and out of that genre a number of times. And now that I don't take myself so seriously anymore, I have a whole lot more fun with it. It's kind of giddy fun. Like the season of The Exorcist that I did on Fox, I played the demon on it, and the grosser I became and the more gooey and just possessed. I mean, I was the demon, so I was possessing others, but that's just fun. And you have special effects and crazy contact lenses and prosthetics on your body, and I love it. I really do. It's fun if you take it as it's intended, like a roller coaster ride and all of that. Yeah, I'm into it.
Every time I speak to someone who's in horror films or shows, they seem to have the most fun the grosser it gets, which gives me a lot of joy as a fan of that kind of stuff myself. And I'm wondering, do you have kind of any favorite? Do you watch horror or do you read horror books yourself? Is that something that you gravitate towards in your own downtime?
I like psychological horror, such as the Mothman Prophecies or The Others or Get Out or Parasite from our friends at Neon. And all three of Oz Perkins' previous movies, I absolutely loved. I wasn't familiar with them before I became attached to the movie, but I'm such a huge fan of his. Those suspenseful films that play with the dark sides of real life and the otherworldly spirits and all of that. That really intrigues me. I don't care personally for slasher films or films that kind of have the shock aspect of being as gross as they can possibly be. That's just not for me.
Getting into Longlegs, I had the pleasure of interviewing Oz for this podcast as well to talk about it. I've been a big fan of his work as a director pretty much since he started making films. And I was so, so excited for Longlegs. And I'm wondering, he struck me as someone who has such a unique way of thinking about films and such an interesting way of writing them. Do you remember what struck you about Longlegs when you first read the script?
Oh, for sure. I first of all had a very strange dream the night after the script had been sent to me. I
Oh
hadn't
my
read it
God.
yet. I received it quite late and I planned to read it the next day. And so I had a dream, which, since I haven't seen the film by by design, I didn't realize until someone told me that this precise moment didn't make it into the film because the moment with Ruth and Lee, where Ruth shoots the effigy doll, changed
Mm-hmm.
a bit in the telling of it. But originally, there was a moment where Ruth, my character, ends up cradling her daughter in her arms and then plunges a hypodermic needle into her neck. And that's what knocked her out so that Ruth could go complete the the murders and finish
Mm-hmm.
the job, as it were. And that didn't end up in the movie, but I had a dream about a body language very similar to that and a mother and daughter relationship. And it was so, so weird and profound. And then I read the script and there it was. And I have rarely had such a feeling of visceral, I have to play this character. I felt like I knew her on a level way beyond what was on the page and longed to play this role. I knew that something very different was going to come out of me that could only come out with this particular role if I were fortunate enough to be given it. And then I had the most magical meeting with Oz on Zoom, and we talked about Ruth and his work and our personal histories. And
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty clear to me at the end of our call that it would be one of the best experiences of my life. And I just started praying nonstop that it was going to happen. And I really do say my prayers. And sure enough, the next morning I got a call. So
It was destined to happen. And I'm really curious because I really loved Ruth as a character. I really like those kind of characters who believe themselves to be doing the right thing, even when they're doing all the terrible things. And I wonder kind of what was your entry point into her? How did you see her? How did you talk about kind of needing to play her. What was your approach to her? Because I think in another performer's hands, perhaps they would have played her as a straight up villain. And I felt like it wasn't as simple with you.
I didn't think it was that at all on the page.
Mm.
And that's what I loved the most about her in Oz's depiction of her in words was that I understood clearly that the core of her character was to tell the story of a very complicated love between a mother and a daughter, which is the most complicated kind of love I think there is between human beings. There's nothing stranger or more intense on both ends.
Mm.
And I think it's clear that anybody who loves their daughter would really do anything they could to keep her alive. I don't know that most people could do what Ruth did or would make that choice, but I saw it also that Ruth had some trauma and some mental illness even before Longlegs showed up, which is
Mm.
why it was such a symbiotic meeting and why he was able to get in the way he was. In some ways, Ruth was bizarrely strong
Mm.
and also obviously not well. I loved the challenge of being able to journal, to create playlists, to just start thinking constantly about what Ruth's mind might be like.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I just trusted that my initial knowing that I knew how to play her based on that first read, I trusted that she was going to find me also.
Mm.
So I don't any longer, when I play a role that's dark, I don't feel the need to live in it or wallow. I just kind of start instinctively figuring her out. I also would say there's some ancestral stuff that I think is part of the reason why it resonated as deeply as it did with me, probably generations and generations old.
Mhm.
And in having done that technical work to prepare for Ruth, when I showed up on set, I'd already communicated with Oz so closely about what was happening at every beat and what was going through
Mm.
Ruth's head in every scene. So I I really had to only step aside and let Ruth come in. And
Mm.
it was such a powerful and eerie experience. That's why I've chosen not to watch the movie. I really want to see everybody else's work in it. I just don't want to see my own. Not now, anyhow.
I wanted to ask you about that because you mentioned it a little bit earlier. Is that something that you do with all of your work? You don't watch it because you don't want to see yourself, or is that only with Longlegs?
It's it's specifically for Longlegs for that specific reason. It
Mm.
feels like a darkness that came out of me that is way different than just playing a role. Something else
Mhm.
is going on there that I know has come through on the screen. I know in the little clips I have glimpsed on
Mhm.
social media and that sort of thing. And even hearing what my voice sounded like when I did ADR in the studio, it's really intense. So I just feel as though that's intended for everyone else to see, but I have
Mm.
no, I feel like I left that behind and I don't really want to see it at
Mm.
this time anyhow. I, I like many actors, watching myself on screen is not my favorite. I would just as soon not.
Mhm.
But generally, if there's a premiere, I'll go see the movie. And if I'm going to do press, I would choose to see the movie ahead of time for that, so I'm
Mhm.
aware of what's going on. There has been one other role I've played in an indie film called Fuzzy Head that I also chose not to watch for the same reason. Very different character, but
Interesting. Mm.
she's she's also somebody I didn't want to see. But yeah, it's not my favorite. I'd rather watch somebody else's work. In fact, when I've had the experience of being on a show, a TV show that I was already an existing fan of, it absolutely changes the experience of watching that show going forward because suddenly the illusion
It's
is a
shattered.
little, yeah, it's shattered.
Mm.
I could still enjoy The Walking Dead after I'd been on it, but not in the same way that I did before I got to
That
know
makes
people.
sense.
And then it became like, oh, I want to see my friends. I want to see this great episode they told me they had a lot to do in. But I don't, or the show Nashville, when I was on that, that was kind of my guilty pleasure show. And then I was on it and I just,
It became
I knew
work.
all the
It became
actors
the
now,
job.
so I don't believe them as those characters now. But
you must have seen there was so much hype about this film. There was so much anticipation. There was so much eeriness that was being built up. And I've seen it a couple times in different environments. And it's always there. Like, it's always pulsating through the audience. And I'm always curious, kind of, what was the experience of making it like? You know, you mentioned before that it was a really eerie experience in some ways. What was the actual process of experience of shooting it like?
It was truly joyful. Working with Oz was wonderful. I found him to be such a sure-handed director, so positive of what he wanted and needed in each scene. He commanded the utmost respect from not only the actors, but every crew member, because he's so steady-keeled and obviously loves what he does too. There's a gleeful joy about working with him that is infectious, because he gets so excited about demonstrating what he sees, and he's just wonderful. He also he finds the beautiful balance between making sure that the actors are giving the performance that he's looking for, but also getting out of the actor's way, so that we don't feel like our initial instinct is stifled. At that point, we had already been in such communication with him. He was very available on text and call and email. So anytime I had an idea about Ruth or a question about a line a few days before we'd film it, he was there to answer, usually with a nice big paragraph of explaining, and very, very collaborative, not precious about anything. There were a few words I wondered about, and he would say, absolutely, you're right, let's change that. Or he would say, no, I think this is right, and here's why. Just not about ego, just about let's craft and create and play. When we did the final scene, that big finale,
Yes.
it was a 2-day shoot. And I had the most magical experience I've had so far, and probably will ever have on a film set. But who knows? Maybe somebody will beat it. But for now, it remains the most magical, because my coverage, my close-up, was one of the last shots we were going to do, I think, before the special effects with the gun splatters and all of that stuff. And so we'd been filming the scene now for a day and a half, and then the camera moves around the room, and the way the light was, it came to me, I think, the last close-up. So Oz had been seeing all the different ways I was playing her, and there's a lot of ways to go with that. At this point in the movie, we know all 3 versions of Ruth. We've met them all, and this is sort of all of them coming together in some weird way. So he and I had also talked at length about how will Ruth be in this final scene. We knew that there were multiple ways it could go. So I was trying it out a few different ways with his blessing. And in fact, he would come up and whisper in my ear different directions to trigger performances from other actors while it wasn't on me. And then it came around to me, and I asked him, so what do we think? What is Ruth going through here? And he proceeded to have me do it, I believe, 6 different times, which is a lot for a close-up. And each time he gave me a different direction. They were diametrically opposed from each other. 6 radically different ways to play the scene. No time in between, just like one of them was the depths of despair and sorrow and mourning and knowing it was the end and I was never going to see her again, you know. So that had a lot of tears, obviously. And then they had to rush in with hair and makeup, fix my face, and then go again. And it would be something completely different. Okay, now it's reverence. Now you're just filled with awe at the proceedings. And isn't this magnificent? And this is the most sacred time of all. And
Did he tell you which take ended up in the final cut?
he didn't, but I asked him because I wasn't seeing the movie. I was curious as I was doing my press, my virtual junket day, and he said that he used takes from 2 or 3 of them. So
Oh
I'm
my
not
God.
sure which ones they are, in fact.
Because even as you're describing it, I'm remembering that close up and that final scene. And it's a very complicated expression where it seemed to me from memory that all of those feelings of despair and mourning, but also awe and almost satisfaction, are going through her face and her mind as she, does the Hail Satan and dies. It's quite an extraordinary ending.
I felt like Oz did me the greatest honor in that moment because I was aware that this was very unusual, and I was aware that I was so malleable and so free. I don't know when I've felt so free as an actor to be able to just on a dime do whatever he said to do. I didn't have to think twice or anything. It was just there. And it was delightful, delightful. And when it was over and Oz said, okay, moving on, there was a round of applause. And Blair came over and shook my hand and he said, that was a masterclass.
Oh my God. And, I wanted to pick up something you mentioned before about Ruth and Ruth as a mother and this very complicated love that exists between her and Lee. What do you think, kind of in your opinion, how would you describe the relationship between Ruth and Lee?
It's so hard to describe. I mean, I sensed all of these. I sense that Ruth has distanced herself quite a lot from Lee, partially to protect her. And Lee has distanced herself from Ruth to protect herself, and also because she can't get a straight answer out of her mother, and she thinks it's just because her mom's crazy. I sensed a lot of fear as well from Micah's Lee. We never discussed it either. I think it bears saying. I found it fascinating that Micah and I came to this relationship together with whatever it meant to us, and we just locked eyes and did it. And it felt like a conscious choice on both of our parts not to talk much about it beforehand, not to talk at all about it beforehand. We never discussed it. But I sensed just that before Longlegs showed up and for the rest of Ruth's life, I think Lee was the sole reason she had for existing. I sensed a lot of like an obsession with her daughter, obviously a great love, but also the line between love and obsession is very, very nebulous sometimes. And I think, again, even if Longlegs hadn't turned up at their house that day, I think Ruth wasn't right. And I think her relationships with men were very fraught. I don't think she was easy to get along with. She was not happy. And she was transferring all of her purpose onto Lee. I sensed that in their body language together when Lee was a child, and just all of it, this something that it comes from a good place, but a child needs to distance, and makes sense to me that Lee loves her very much, but also it could be very smothering.
I wonder, just in your take on the character and the film, interestingly, just based on having made it and not seen the final thing, do you think that everything that goes on, all the effigies, all the satanic stuff, do you think that Ruth really believes it and it's true because she believes it? Or do you think it's actually happening?
I believe it happened from the dolls. I don't think, I believe that Ruth may very well have needed to intervene at a few instances. Like some of the times when she's absolutely covered with blood and we see her after, I believed she had just aided something. She carries her knife with her at all times just in case.
Mm-hmm.
But I think her primary purpose is to watch and make sure it happens as planned. Make sure that doll is having the effect it's supposed to. And I think it felt symbolic of those horrible times we all have read about when a family member turns on their other family members.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see it coming and you don't have an obvious history of mental illness. Well, what causes somebody to do that? I believe there are dark forces, and if you're susceptible to those and you let them in, as is said in the movie many times, then I think it probably does come from an external dark force causing you to do that. The same way that if you choose the light and you go out into the world with love in your heart and empathy and reflecting all of that, it's likely to come back to you. But yeah, I think Longlegs, Dale was just very deeply mired in that world, and he figured out how to infuse that energy into these effigies.
Before I let you go, I wondered if I could ask you about a film that's not Longlegs, which is my favorite John Waters film, Cecil B. Demented.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Absolutely love that film. And I was wondering if you could share your memories of shooting that.
Yeah. Just so much fun. So much fun. Um, the idea that I would get not only to be in a John Waters film at all, he was always one of my favorite filmmakers, but also that I would get to play a former porn star who would have a sex scene with a gerbil in a John Waters film. That's like getting to have your face eaten by a zombie in. That's iconic. It's amazing.
Yes. And those outfits.
The outfit. It was so much fun and so weird and fun to be as over the top as we were and just lean into that and embrace it and not take it seriously. It was the silliest thing I'd done up to that point, and I absolutely loved it. Working with John in Baltimore too, he's so well known there, and it was exciting to be welcomed onto sets with John at the helm. And the other fun thing about it was that because there were 12 of us in most of the scenes, the ADs would do head counts before the scenes, because it wasn't like a normal movie where all your actors are on place. There's 12 little heads you have to count.
Like summer camp.
Yeah, it was really, really neat. Yeah. I remember just how much I liked Melanie Griffith too, and how much I got along with her. And she was such a sweetheart, fellow Leo. I I got dehydrated and um, kind of sick one night, and I had to go to the emergency room and get some fluids. And she came to visit me the next morning as I was leaving, and she just did the sweetest thing. She not only folded my clothes that I'd kind of taken off and they were strewn on the chair there in the room where I was getting my fluids, but she also arranged the clothes like they were all set for a person to put on. Like she put the pants, smoothed them out and put them on a chair with the legs going down the seat part like a person would be sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
And then she placed the sweater above that with one arm out and one arm folded this way.
That's so adorable.
It was so cute. She like turned into a little mama bear and got my clothes all set for me to put them back on.
That's so sweet.
Of
Yeah.
Mel Griffith.
Always remembered that.
Before I let you go, just a final silly question in the spirit of Cecil B. Demented. I know your character in that film had Andy Warhol tattooed on her as her favorite director. If you were to get a tattoo of a filmmaker, who would you tattoo on yourself?
I mean, it would have to be David Lynch because he changed my life by putting me in my first movie. And every experience I've had since, I've now worked with him 4 times.
Mm.
And he was the original role model for me of what a director should be and how much fun and how free one should feel on a film set and how much you should trust your director. And for better or for worse on some films, he is always the role model in my head. I mean, if someone is taking themselves too seriously, shouting at people, or giving direction that is all over the place and crazy making and stifling your inspiration, I just feel that's very unfortunate because I learned from the very best. And if David hadn't been my first director and hadn't been as wonderful, I don't know if I would have wanted to be an actor for the rest of my life. But because of him, I did, and I've been blessed to. So, David, you're getting a tattoo, I guess.
I love that. That's a really sweet note to end on. Alicia, thank you so much for your time. I've really appreciated this conversation.
What a joy this has been. Thank you.